Jimmy Lee Swaggart was born on March 15, 1935, in the small rural town of Faraday, Louisiana. Raised in a deeply religious Pentecostal household, his early life was marked by poverty, music, and faith. His father, a fiddle player and preacher, and his mother, a devout believer, immersed young Jimmy in the culture of Southern revivalism. From an early age, he was surrounded by gospel music and fire-and-brimstone preaching, the rhythms and emotions of which would later shape both his ministry and his musical career. He was also cousins with famous musicians Jerry Lee Lewis and Mickey Gilley, whose fame in secular music would run parallel to Jimmy's own rise in the Christian world. Despite their financial struggles, Jimmy showed a strong devotion to his faith. He began preaching at the age of 17 after what he described as a powerful personal encounter with God. With no formal theological training, he hit the road with his wife Frances, whom he married in 1952 when he was just 17 years old. The couple traveled across the southern United States, often sleeping in churches or small motels, and preaching wherever a congregation would have them. Life was tough, and the early years of their ministry were defined by extreme hardship. At times, they survived on a few dollars a week, but Swaggart remained committed to his calling. By the late 1960s, Jimmy Swaggart's ministry began to grow beyond the small churches and rural revivals. He started a radio ministry called the Camp Meeting Hour, which allowed him to reach thousands of listeners across the country. His powerful voice, emotional delivery, and passionate sermons quickly drew attention. By the early 1970s, Swaggart transitioned into television, launching the Jimmy Swaggart Telecast. It wasn't long before his face and voice were being broadcast into homes across America and around the world. His ministry exploded in size and influence, with millions tuning in weekly to hear his sermons. Swaggart's message resonated with a large audience. He preached about sin, salvation, and the need for a personal relationship with Jesus Christ. His voice was emotional, sometimes trembling with conviction, and he didn't shy away from confronting issues like pornography, abortion, alcohol, and drug abuse. He spoke to a generation of conservative Christians who saw the world around them changing and felt like Swaggart was giving voice to their values. He was a fierce critic of secular culture and became one of the most influential voices of the American evangelical movement during the 1980s. During this time, Swaggart's ministry was taking in over $150 million annually. He had a Bible college, a vast television and radio network, a publishing house, and a global missionary arm. His televised crusades filled stadiums. He was not only a preacher, but a gospel musician, recording over 200 albums and selling millions of records. His music, filled with soulful piano melodies and heartfelt vocals, was another avenue through which he spread his message. Songs like "There Is a River" and "Jesus, Just the Mention of Your Name" became staples of evangelical households. He won numerous awards for his gospel recordings and was revered not only as a preacher, but also as a gifted musician. Swaggart's influence wasn't limited to religion. He was a political force as well, frequently engaging in cultural debates and aligning himself with the growing Christian conservative movement. He was vocal in his opposition to gay rights, liberal education, and what he saw as the moral decay of American society. His sermons often targeted Hollywood, secularism, and the growing acceptance of behaviors he deemed sinful. He had a loyal base of followers who sent in donations, bought his books and music, and supported his vision for an America grounded in biblical values. But at the peak of his influence came one of the most shocking scandals in religious history. In 1988, Jimmy Swaggart was caught in a prostitution scandal that would shake the evangelical world to its core. Investigations revealed that Swaggart had been involved with a prostitute in Louisiana, and photographs emerged showing him entering and leaving a motel with her. The media frenzy was immediate, and his credibility as a moral authority was called into question overnight. The man who had so loudly condemned sexual immorality was now at the center of a sexual scandal of his own. What followed was one of the most memorable and emotional public confessions in American religious history. On national television, in front of his congregation and a watching world, Jimmy Swaggart stood behind a pulpit, weeping, and declared, "I have sinned." His tears were raw and visible, his voice shaking as he asked for forgiveness from his wife, his church, and God. Some saw it as a sincere act of repentance, a powerful example of a fallen man seeking grace. Others saw it as calculated damage control, a dramatic performance designed to save what remained of his empire. In the aftermath of the scandal, the Assemblies of God, the denomination with which Swaggart was affiliated, suspended and later defrocked him. His television ministry suffered severe losses, with many stations dropping his program and donations plummeting. The man who once commanded the attention of millions saw his audience shrink dramatically. Yet Swaggart refused to disappear. He rebuilt his ministry as an independent church, unaffiliated with any denomination, and continued preaching from his family worship center in Baton Rouge. Another scandal surfaced in the early 1990s when he was caught again with a woman under suspicious circumstances. Swaggart initially denied wrongdoing, but the damage to his credibility was further entrenched. By this time, his reputation had shifted from a leading religious figure to a cautionary tale. Still, he persevered. His followers remained, though far fewer than before, and he continued to produce sermons, music, and literature. Swaggart never returned to the heights of the 1980s, but his ministry survived. He launched the SonLife Broadcasting network, which distributed his messages around the world via satellite, cable, and internet streaming. His family became more involved in the church. His wife Frances hosted a Christian talk show. His son Donnie and grandson Gabriel stepped into preaching roles. The Swaggart name continued, and so did the ministry, albeit on a smaller scale. Despite the controversies, many continued to see Jimmy Swaggart as a man who had been broken and redeemed. He became more introspective in his later years, often preaching about grace, mercy, and the redemptive power of Christ. He admitted to past failures but often avoided going into detail. His sermons no longer carried the firebrand condemnations of his earlier days, but instead focused on hope, healing, and the enduring love of God. He continued to record music and write commentaries on the Bible, including a heavily annotated study Bible that became popular among Pentecostal and evangelical circles. Over the decades, his legacy became more complex. For many, he remained a symbol of the danger of unchecked power and the hypocrisy that can come with moral absolutism. For others, he was a man who, despite his failings, never abandoned his calling and continued to preach the gospel until the end. He represented both the best and the worst of American televangelism, its reach, its power, and its vulnerability to corruption. In July 2025, Jimmy Swaggart passed away at the age of 90. His death marked the end of an era in American religious broadcasting. Tributes poured in from all sides, some honoring his musical talent and decades of preaching, others noting the fall from grace that forever altered his ministry. His influence on Christian television and Southern gospel music remains undeniable. His confessional style of preaching, emotional delivery, and use of media reshaped how evangelicals communicated with the world. Jimmy Swaggart's life was a paradox. He rose to spiritual stardom on the wings of conviction, fell hard under the weight of personal sin, and then built a second act grounded in humility and perseverance. Whether seen as a cautionary figure or a redeemed soul, his impact endures. He helped define an era of American faith, one where television, music, and preaching collided into a powerful form of spiritual outreach. In life and death, he remains one of the most recognizable and debated preachers in American history.